So what I'm going to start out with the eye is, you can see, hopefully in your printout, you can see a little bit of the variation of color on the eye. There's around, it's basically yellow, but around the edge of the eye is a little bit warmer. And then right around the pupil there's just a slight bit of green, it looks like. Just a little bit. So I'm going to pre-mix a little bit. I'm going to make a little puddle with raw sienna. Oh, just pure raw sienna. I'm going to make a puddle with mostly lemon yellow and a little bit of raw sienna added to it.
When you're making your puddles, do you use bigger brushes or smaller?
I tend to use a bigger brush. In fact, I've got a brush that I only use to mix paint with. You do tend to wear a brush out when you're using it to mix the colors a lot. So it's kind of a, in fact, I've used it so much I've used it to mix my color with. And another thing that I do like to have is, it's a little cramped on this desk up here, but I like to have a pile of scrap paper. I'll staple them together, and I like to have that in between my palette and my painting, and it's a great way to just test the color out really fast before I put it on the painting itself. And then I also like to add water to the colors in my palette with something like a pipette that I can just squeeze some water off of my big bucket into my bins with color on them. So I'm going to use since I'm working on the eye, I'm going to use my smallest brush to do some of these early details.
What was the other color that you were mixing with the yellow?
I had lemon yellow and raw sienna. And then one mixture was just the raw sienna. And then I have just a very washed out version of Hooker's green. Just a little bit of that for the right around the pupil there. And I'm putting a lot of water in that, so it's very subtle. And I'm going to start with that. I'm just going to I'm using actually this is an aught brush here, but use your smallest brush that you got. I'm just picking up a little of that green, and I'm going to just paint a little bit of it around the pupil there. Now, one of the things I use a lot in my studio is a hair dryer. Not to dry my hair, but to do the paint quicker. And I'm going to hit it with that just so I can go faster on this. Because I want this to dry before I put on the next. The next thing I'm going to do is go around the outer edge of the eye, and I'm going to paint that raw sienna. And again, I'm picking it up from the palette. I'm putting a few strokes on the scrap paper, and then I'm going to go to painting it. And try to work up on it slowly. I mean, eventually you can get watercolors to be very vivid, but I think it's best to work at it cautiously and bring your colors up in layers. If you go too fast, then you might go too far. Hit it with the hairdryer. Okay, that's dry. So I'm going to pick up, it's like my number 1 brush. And now I'm going to dip into the yellow mixture with a touch of raw sienna in it. And I'm going to paint that over pretty much the whole area outside the pupil. So it should pick up a little bit of that green and soften a little bit of the edge that was orange around the edge. Still a little wet. Okay, looks like I'm going to have to go maybe one step more and another round of the orange around the edge. You know, that's what I'm going to have to do. You may have already gotten to as dark as you want to go, but for me I'll have to add a little bit more around the edge. And often I'll think I'll have the eye finished at this stage, and then once I get the rest of the painting built up around it, I might have to add a little bit more. It's a little harder to judge against the stark white of the paper. And then I'm going to do another round of the yellow raw sienna mix over the whole thing. And let that dry. Okay, so the next thing, while I'm letting that dry, I'm going to start mixing up my next few colors that I'm going to work on the dark feathers above the eye next. And so I'm going to start working on mixing that up while the other part dries, and then we'll finish up the eye when it's dry. So I'm going to take French ultramarine and quite a bit of neutral tint. Probably more neutral tint than French ultramarine. You could probably use cobalt blue just fine also. I think either one would work pretty well.
And the neutral tint?
Yes. And if you don't have neutral tint, you could use the Payne's Gray, because this is kind of a cool colored black, if you will. So I'm going to mix, that's going to be my really dark part of that shape above the eye. And then I'm going to use the same combination of colors for the lighter parts of it, the lightest blue in there, but I'm going to have more blue versus the neutral tint. And I'll have more water added to it, and so it'll be more washed out. And you know, I'm trying to match what I'm seeing in my photograph as best I can. And if any point anybody wants to walk up and take a look at anything I'm doing up here, you're welcome to, because definitely the projection doesn't show the colors very well in comparison to what the real thing is. In fact, you know what maybe I can do? Probably don't need to look at the screen too much right now. Whoa, what did I do now? Oh, I broke it. Cable came out, I guess. Shoot. Well, now I lost the screen altogether.
Which one was it? Do you know?
Well, that was already out.
Oh, these all work?
Yeah, this one is just, I think.
It might be the property of just like wiggling things.
Yeah. Did that come out?
I don't know if it has a slot for it, so I just put it back in. But maybe this in here. So you're
I think
projecting
that's
from
all right
this?
because they're projecting. Yeah, it's all right. Well, I just have to. I'll just have to skip that, I guess. Thanks for trying, though. All right, so my eye is dry now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the pupil and right around the edge of the eye. And one of the techniques I like to do for this is to make a skin of paint. And what I'll do is I'm going to use mostly neutral tint for this. You could add just a touch of maybe burnt umber to it or something like that, but you could also get away with just neutral tint as it is. And I'll mix a very thick mixture of that, and I like to let it dry. And if you're at home and you need to do it fast, you can even use your hair dryer to dry it really fast. And then I'll pick a little bit of water up with a small brush, like my I'm going to use my 3/0 here, and I'm going to pick up that dry color with the wet brush. And I have found that I can get a much more controlled line, and if you will, a safer line by doing that. So I'm going to start out by going around the edge. And I tend to use these really small brushes when I'm doing eyes because it's something that you want to get right, because that's going to be a focal point in most paintings. And keep in mind, I'm trying to probably go faster than I normally would at home just to try to get as much in as possible tonight during class. In fact, maybe I can zoom in a little bit here. And usually you want to, you'll want to feel like you've gotten your colors right on the eye before you do this step. I probably could have gone another step, one extra step on the eye, but
Not a razor.
and now I'm going to go into the pupil. Does everybody understand the theory of making a skin with the paint?
No.
Okay, so I've found that when you mix the paint fresh, I found that trying to do really intense details like this, with all that water in there, it does tend to have more of a chance of losing some of the detailed edges. You might have a little bit of spillage of the water, that sort of thing. But by mixing the paint ahead of time and letting it dry, you're picking up that paint, and you're picking up the paint with a wet brush, and it's pretty intense pigment in there. You're concentrating the pigment basically, and it really seems to result in a finer line.
You're referring to the skin of eyes versus
The skin,
actually on the page.
right, the skin of the paint that it's forming on my palette. And if anybody wants to come up and take a look at it, it's basically just dry paint there, and I'm just picking it right up with the wet brush. See it right over here? One over this side. See, I've just let it dry. In fact, I mixed this last night and just hit it with the hairbrush, so I didn't have to do it when I got here.
Was it just like a little bit of paint and just a little bit of water? Or?
No, it was pretty intense, pigment in there still, but this concentrates it even more.
Okay, so
Yeah.
not much water.
Pardon me?
No.
Some water in there initially to mix it up, but it was definitely more paint than water, I would say. Okay, now while that's drying, I'm gonna switch my focus to the dark area above the eye a little bit. And I'm actually going to start out with probably start out with a wash, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a couple brushes ready to go. So I'm going to have like a one brush to go around the edges, and probably have a 4 brush ready and a 2 brush ready too, so that I can pick them up as I go if I need to. So I'm going to use that lighter mixture that I talked about that's more blue than neutral tint. Start out with that. And it's started to settle a little bit, so I'll take my brush and swish it around a little bit to activate the paint a lot and get it all activated in my puddle. So I'm going to start with the one brush.
Do you generally keep your brushes more greasy or like fully like wet?
I'd say they're somewhere in between. They're not completely soaked with paint. Probably about half. And now as I'm getting out into the main part of the blue, I'm picking up the number 2 brush, bringing it out. Trying to keep the edges wet as I go, so I'm not making a Now I'm going to pick up the small one and get up here for some of the detail edge.
Question about that little sparkle in the eye. You know, sometimes when there is that reflection and the eyes look really round. If it's not there, do you try to make it up?
No, and that highlight in the eye is typically only going to be visible when you got like a really sunny day and the eye is facing towards the sun. On a cloudy day, you'll often have a highlight, but it's not going to be that really bright one, sparkly look. It's going to be more of a glaze. You know, often it's like a gray glaze instead of a bright highlight. So I'm going to keep this going over towards the end, but here out of the blue it gets really dark, so I'm not too worried about this side as much as I am the other. Okay, now I'm getting down to the part of the feather that goes straight out, and I'm going to pick up my number 2 brush. And I can't really rotate it on this because I'm doing the video, but don't be afraid to rotate your whole painting around to whatever angle works best for you. We tend to have, you know, for me, you know, I like to work the brush starting away from me and towards me is the way I have most control. But it might be different for you. You might like it the other way, and you know, just move the painting around to where it gives you the most control. Okay, I'm going to zap it with the hairbrush. Or no, the hair dryer. So basically, the thing that I was talking about with the skin, probably a lot of your puddles of paint right now are already forming a skin where they're starting to dry. That's basically what the skin is. So a lot of times you can have the center of your puddle be active and wet, and then around the edges are the skin, and you can use, you know, both techniques. So now I'm going to take that same mixture I used to do the wash, and I'm going to do some details, starting on the left side. looking at my photo to try to, and here I'm going to use got my aught brush going.
So, but are you using the same
Same
paint
cut
as you were using for the wash?
for the first one, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a few spots where the feathers look a little darker, and there I'm going to pick up the darker mixture that I made. I might mix it half and half with my lighter mixture and then paint too. And going back and forth to my picture, I'm trying to pick out anything that looks distinctive to try to focus on.
For your darker mixture, does that have any of the neutral tint in it?
Yes, it does. It has more neutral tint in it than the lighter mixture does. But it also has the blue in there too. If I want my paint to be a little bit darker, I'll pick up from the skin side of that puddle. If I want it to be a little lighter, I'll just take it from the middle. Can also start to work on some of the feathers on the edge. I'm trying to look at the photo as much as I can to go off of what I can see, but there's certainly some artistic license in between. But I think the more you try to paint what you're seeing, the better off you're going to be. As long as you get a good portion of it, I think you're in pretty good shape. And obviously, with something like this, and a number of you have been asking about how big should I make my painting, and in general, it tends to be better to make things bigger than smaller, because you can certainly pack more detail in if your painting is 11 by 14 compared to when it's 9 by 12. You can just physically, the brushes and everything are to your advantage going bigger. And